You're about to start hearing, as we get closer to that January 19th deadline, you're going to start hearing, oh my gosh, if we don't pass this spending bill, blah, 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 we're going to have a government shutdown, we're going to default on our debt, Social Security recipients aren't going to get their money. It's all BS. None of that is true. It's great for headlines, but none of it is true.
The Real Investment Show.
And welcome back to the show this morning. So a lot of things kind of going on. First of all, we have a debt ceiling coming up again. You know, every time we get, through one of these debt ceiling things, they come back to haunt us because we never actually solve a problem. All we do is we just kick the can down the road. We pass a temporary funding bill. We do a continuing resolution that will provide funding for a certain period of time. Of course, we always spend too much money, so we run out of money before we get there. Then we wind up in another situation again. And this is the problem with not passing a budget. We haven't passed a budget since President Obama took office in 2008. We've now moved to governing the country by doing these continuing resolutions, which are essentially just a bill that says, okay, we spent $1 last year, so we're going to spend $1 again this year and add 8 cents to it. And then we come up with these, kind of these workarounds for bills that get passed, these spending bills that get passed in between. For instance, like the Inflation Reduction Act, right? We allocated $80 billion to the IRS. So we kind of mess around with those funding corners and trim a little of this and do a little of that, and we try to come up with something that'll kind of keep the bills paid, so to speak, for a short period of time until we wind up in this problem again. And so here we are once again, January 19th around the corner. That's where supposedly we hit the debt ceiling, but the actual estimate somewhere around February the 3rd. However, given that Janet Yellen isn't squawking all over television about how we're going to default on our debt, which we never do, probably means that we have longer than that to get this done. But nonetheless, there is a bill being floated around right now to provide funding, $1.59 trillion, just small numbers, right? Just, we don't even fathom how much money we spend now. It's just quite phenomenal. It's 1.66 trillion. So I apologize. 1.66 trillion in this package to avert a shutdown. Now, here's what's interesting. When you went through this and you kind of look at some of the spending, there's $886 billion for defense spending, $772 billion in domestic discretionary spending. A big chunk of that's going to fund, Ukraine and Israel, and of course you can't separate those two now. So we just keep funding these wars that are going on. But I thought it was interesting because one of the issues that's going on is that we have a tremendous influx of individuals coming across the border illegally, and a big chunk of those are on welfare. And I thought that one of the interesting statements was by the Democrats talking about that they have avoided any draconian cuts to the Social Security welfare system in this bill. We were just talking about last week that, without some reform, Social Security, Medicare, welfare, it's going to go bankrupt at some point. There's just no way around that. It's just math. You only have so much money coming in. You have too much money going out. And we keep giving money to more and more individuals of different types. We'd say, hey, here's a group of people that need it, widows, orphans, firefighters, whoever. And this has been going on since the 60s. We just start giving them money. So we have this finite pool of money of people contributing to it. And that pool of contributors is declining because of our birth rates in the country are declining. So we have less people paying in. Back in 1930s, when we started Social Security, we had 16 workers for every one worker taking out. Today, it's less than 2 contributing versus every worker taking out. So again, it's just mathematically unsound. And yet, and this is our point on Friday, is that, nobody can run for office. I said Friday, sorry, on Wednesday when I was talking with Danny. Nobody can run for office and talk about reforming Social Security, which is a huge amount of people absolutely depend on Social Security for up to 90% of their retirement income. A big chunk of people depend on it for at least 50% of the retirement income, but there is a significant chunk of retirees that have 90% dependency on Social Security. So, Rich is very fond of saying, hey, you know what, it's never going to go out, nothing's ever going to happen to it. We're always going to find a way to fund it because we don't want, people, living on the streets. And he's right. It's always going to be funded with some sort of debt issuance or whatever it is. But again, the point is that nobody can ever come in and actually create reforms for Social Security welfare because it is the honeypot that politicians use to fund voting groups. So again, we bring over, when I just told you recently, I went down hunting in South Texas with some clients of ours, and Danny and I both went, and they were down there talking about it, that these illegals come across the border onto their property. Their property actually backs up to the Rio Grande. These individuals come across the border, they immediately get a $5,000 Visa card and a plane ticket. So where's that money coming from, right? It's coming from somewhere. And then once they're here, they have access to welfare. Okay, so what are they contributing, right? Are they paying into the system in order to take care of it? No, because again, this is government. Ever since the 1960s, the idea of Social Security initially was great. You pay into it, and then when you're too old to work, you get to draw out of that benefit to live on until you die, and then you were supposed to die fairly young, right? You're supposed to die in your 60s, not live to be 80s and 90s. That wasn't the original intention. We lived too long. But in the 1960s, it became the honeypot for any other special interest group that people needed access. We feel that this group of people needs money, so let's take it out of Social Security welfare. And that's fine. Look, I'm not arguing the point, but the point is it's not sustainable, and we keep giving more and more money to more and more groups for votes, for support, etc. And again, this is why nobody will attack Social Security or welfare in form of a political campaign, because you'll immediately not get elected. If you talk to somebody who's on Social Security, they'll tell you, because I hear this conversation all the time, they'll say, oh yeah, we definitely need to fix Social Security, just don't take mine, right? Don't take my benefits, take it from some other person, right? And this problem, nobody wants to give up their benefit. Everybody knows it's got to be fixed, but nobody wants to give up their benefits, right? So it becomes unfixable. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Anyway, so we're passing this $1.66 trillion. Theoretically, it's probably going to get vetoed in the House. It's probably not going to pass. Or if it passes, it'll pass with majority of Democrat support at this point, because the House part of the Freedom Caucus is not going to vote for a lot of the things that are in this bill. So again, it'll be a fairly contentious fight to get this done. But nonetheless, if we are going to get it passed, and the reason I bring this up, and the reason we talk about this every time, is because you're about to start hearing, as we get closer to that January 19th deadline, you're going to start hearing, oh my gosh, if we don't pass this spending bill, blah, 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 we're going to have a government shutdown, we're going to default on our debt, Social Security recipients aren't going to get their money. It's all BS. None of that is true. It's great for headlines, but none of it is true. We're not going to default on our debt because we can print our own currency. Social Security payments get made because it is mandatory spending. What gets cut, as we've said repeatedly before here on the show, is discretionary spending. So yeah, you got to shut down the parks. You've got to shut down, send home, government workers, which, by the way, if you look at last Friday's unemployment report, big chunk of the workers that were hired in that 216,000 were government employees and educators. With the state of our education system right now, you have to wonder exactly who we're hiring. But different argument for a different day. But we're not going to default. All those headlines are simply to cause a lot of angst so that you as a citizen will call up your local congressman and demand that we pass this spending bill. We can't shut down the government. None of it's true, right? And this is why every time we get to this, we tell you, hey, don't worry about this. It's not going to be an issue. And it never is. We always either pass it in the last hour, or we do shut down the government, and guess what? The world doesn't end. And then we pass some ridiculous bill, and then we all get back to work. So it's just a function of here we are once again. And this is not going to change. This is now the new order of doing business in Washington, D.C. It is no longer a function where the House does its job of, passing a budget, sending it to the Senate for reconciliation, then it goes back to the House to be passed, right? And then signed off on by the president. We don't do that anymore, right? We're now down to the system of just continuing resolutions. It's the easy way to govern. And the best part about it is because since nobody in Washington really wants to cut spending and nobody in Washington really wants to operate on a budget, this is a really easy way to do it because it just increases spending every single year because whatever budget you had just goes up by 8%. Now, if you do your math and the rule of 72 and how often that an 8% increase will double, right? It's every 9 years. And this is why the national debt is now over $34 trillion. Just something to think about. Okay. So when we come back from the break, okay, I'm going to get off that horse for a minute. But I just, the reason I'm bringing it up is you're about to start hearing a bunch of headline nonsense about this. It's like, oh my, especially if this $1.6 trillion bill doesn't pass for some reason, it's going to be, oh my gosh, we're about to default on everything and shut down the government. How terrible this is. You're going to hear all that nonsense. And it's exactly that. It's nonsense. Anyway, be sure to get by the website, though. Speaking of markets and money, be sure and get registered for the upcoming event on January 27th. Myself, Adam Taggart, Michael Leibowitz, Greg Valliere will all be talking about bonds, stocks, the markets, how to invest, how to navigate a presidential election cycle. All of that, January 27th, 8 a.m. to noon. Doors open at 7:30. We're going to feed you breakfast and lunch. So, again, it's all at Hotel Sonesta. Your tickets are online right now at realinvestmentadvice.com. Just click the banner at the top of the page. Be right back.
Get daily investment news you can use, delivered at the speed of the internet at realinvestmentadvice.com.